Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, thank you to Minnesota Management and Budget Commissioner Campbell, Minnesota State Budget Director Mingy, and State Economist Dr. Becker. In these unsettled times, there's a lot of work that their team is putting in to make sure we get these numbers and get them correctly. And I'll say what I stood here in November and said, and it holds true, maybe more so now. Minnesota's put our money into things that invested to improve people's lives: public education, tax cuts for the middle class, feeding our kids, education, and innovation in our business community. The challenges you just heard require us, when we put out the original budget, and it is now more important than ever that we implement that, a responsible, measured, honest budget that tackles our challenges at the state level. But what's clear in this budget picture, and you just heard it, is that there is a storm at the federal level, and that storm is Donald Trump. That's the thing that's changed between November and today's numbers. The uncertainty and the destructive chaos is one thing. We walked in here, we talked about the tariffs, and during that time now, we're hearing that some of the things from the USMCA will be exempted from this. This is chaos. It's nonsense. It's not how you run any business, let alone the federal government, and the impact on states is immense. I don't have a crystal ball to tell you how he's going to act. I can tell you yesterday I had conversations with our neighbors and our biggest trading partners, Premier Canoe in Manitoba and Premier Ford in Ontario, and the havoc it's wreaking on their people is being felt. They are going to have to respond accordingly, and the states are going to be put into that situation. Now look, I know Donald Trump doesn't care about balancing budget. His proposals add $8 trillion to the federal budget. You heard this numbers up here, and I think you're going to get an opportunity to hear some of these leaders up here. I'm going to give a shout out to some of the members of the Republican caucus in the Senate and the House who put Minnesota above politics and wrote a letter that clearly described what the Medicaid cuts would do. I don't believe they agree with me on this. I don't believe they will agree necessarily that the budget is exactly where it's at. But we do have to agree on some facts. Minnesota pays more into the federal government, and the destructive way that these cuts are being implemented will negatively impact, and you heard that, 42% of Americans' children. All for the reason to give tax cuts to the wealthiest folks, some of them who are in charge of making the cuts. It's insanity. Here in Minnesota, we don't do things that way. We've balanced 3 budgets in this administration. We've created record surplus, growth in the economy, through a downturn, through a global pandemic. We've done it bipartisanly in the past. But the reality is this: we have a solid budget, we have surpluses now, but we have some cost drivers over the horizon. So making sure that we're curbing the increases while delivering those services is going to be absolutely critical. You heard that laid out about where the numbers are. You saw what the inflationary impact would have on that. I really appreciate when I heard Commissioner Campbell say, this is not the rainy day. That historic amount that we have in the fund, that's there. The corrections we're talking about, 13 states look over the horizon. 37 states would only show you those first 2 columns. If you just looked at those, everything's fine. $2 billion surplus, everything's fine. The over the horizon, especially in some areas that we can contain costs while still delivering services, keeps us AAA bond rated. It keeps the growth that we're seeing both in population and in business startups, real wealth, and the opportunities of innovation. So we've got an opportunity here to tackle these things. We have an opportunity because we've seen it bipartisanly. Folks in the House and Senate know that we need to watch what the federal government's doing around Medicaid. We need to take care of our most vulnerable. We need to continue to invest in those things that make a difference in people's lives. And when we do so, we end up year after year, balanced budgets, AAA bond rating, and we're going to be able, in this budget that I put forward, is to cut taxes for the middle class, the first ever sales tax cut, and we're going to be able to implement a very aggressive R&D tax credit that will continue to spur the innovation that we're seeing. We were in the Netherlands last week where we saw Philips Corporation make one of their first commitments back into the United States, investing in Plymouth in technology around their medical devices and upstream. We're talking about, and we're in Rotterdam, where we're seeing sustainable aviation fuel up to scale, And the place in the United States that's most apt to be able to do that right now is right here in Northwest Minnesota and connected to the Delta hub at Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. Those are things that continue to grow the economy. So we need to get a budget done. We need to get a responsible budget done. We need to look to 28, 29 to curb some of the increasing costs, while at the same time continue to invest in the things that helps Minnesota grow. So again, as I would say, that basically the only thing that's changed since November is Donald Trump's chaos to the economy. It changes day to day. It provides the uncertainty that we don't need. And I saw it in Cannon Falls, where we saw our ag producers deeply concerned, and their Canadian counterparts just simply stated the facts. Fertilizer costs are going to cost about $8 an acre for our producers on corn and soybeans because of the potash and the things that the Trump administration has put into place. I think when we see it with our energy costs, and again, talking to the premiers of Manitoba, we receive over 1,300 megawatts of power from Manitoba. It's really important. If we aren't able to get it from a friend where we negotiated a fair price and they're unable to continue to deliver that, our power producers are going to have to go out on a market, and we won't have the leverage to be able to do that, and that will be passed on to consumers and to businesses. So I would encourage, when the Republican folks come up here, they tell us what they're doing to talk to the Trump administration about bringing some sanity back to the budgeting situation. Work with us on getting tax cuts put in place for the middle class here in Minnesota, making sure that we're continuing to invest in our education, make sure we're investing in transportation, that we have those dedicated costs, and continue to see a growth economy that we've seen in Minnesota coming out of the pandemic. With that, I'd be glad to take some questions. Yeah, and as you see, it's around the edges with, when you're talking numbers this big, it's around the edges with the inflation. This was, I believe, predicated on February 10th data, if I'm not mistaken. And as I said, we've had 3 changes in 24 hours to tariffs numbers that have come out. I don't know if we're all getting used to insanity being the norm now, but that is not normal behavior. So what I would say on this is we've got a couple weeks. We will come back. We are not going to chase the chaos. We are going to predicate it on the real numbers that we have, which is this. And I think what you'll see us, we'll come back with those numbers. They will balance, as we always do. But I think the base of that budget is now more important than ever to make sure that we're containing those costs in the areas that are driving over the horizon, and continue to invest in the things that make us our growth.
Governor, this doesn't have the federal cuts, freezes, layoffs.
No.
The federal government is a top 10 employer, or was a top 10 employer in the state. Do you have a sense of the scale of the layoffs?
Well, and you heard this, that 80,000 at the VA. It's 438,000 at the VA. If somebody comes up to you and tells you, oh, that's not all doctors. Really? People that wash the linens, that keep our veterans safe? The people that do the procurement on the drugs? The people that fix the maintenance system in the building? And somebody who's never served, a billionaire, goes in with an 18-year-old and decides 80,000 of those people aren't worthwhile? This is nuts. And we got to stay balanced here. Well, Governor, there's probably some of those jobs. Yeah, probably. Which ones? You tell me. Show me names. Show me numbers. So yes, I am deeply concerned. Here in Minnesota, someone tell me if I'm forgetting this number. Is it 22,000, I believe, of federal workers, I think, about what we have spread across from the national parks to the weather service to other things. Yes, it will be dramatic with these people going out. Now, the one thing is I'm going to say is we value that. We are aggressively looking if we can hire people into Minnesota, if we can hire them both into state government or we can hire them into the private sector. We're encouraging people to look to Minnesota as a landing spot, but man, it's tough. So yeah, it's a significant impact. And you heard Commissioner Campbell say this. If the budget that they put forward and they voted on goes through, $1.2 to $1.6 billion. And that impact, again, because all the things, if you want to come up here and, the make-believe stuff that the president was saying money was being spent on, that's the fringe on the side. This is Medicare. This is Medicaid. This is transportation funding. And the impact on it, as you heard, a third of our budget. And we in Minnesota are one of the least dependent states on the federal government, and the impact, as Mary mentioned, it will be dramatic. And again, I hope we don't lose this. There's a macro impact of this, which is Dr. Becker's job to tell us on. I think it's our job as elected officials. This is the micro. That's a family that worked hard to serve this country, serve this state, and they are being told that they are not valued and being told to say, list 5 things that you did this week.
When you say hire some of these workers in the state government, are you talking about existing vacancies or?
If we have vacancies open, yeah, if we have experts in we have state veterans homes that we're always trying to find people in, if we have folks that know how to care for veterans, we would look to try and do that, but it's hard to absorb it. Now, look, folks are looking for workers, but these are professionals that are being let go.
Governor, beyond the federal stuff, you've got the forecast showing even more growth with the HHS, education, special education, disability waivers. Do you foresee having to have even stronger curbing of that growth as opposed to?
Well, I think that's what we'll get into. And I think it's because this is reasonable, it's stretched over the 2 bienniums where we get a handle on this, where we don't have that rainy day. It's not a crisis. There's time to do this because everyone here and every legislator that stands in front of you is going to have to recognize that if we don't do this, it will be there. And as I've said, it'll be 1/8 of the budget by 2028, 29. It'll be about half the budget by 2035. I think this path is still there. This is a relatively small on the edges of this to be able to adjust. So I don't think we're going to be asked for any more. And again, the goal of that is not stopping or cutting, curbing growth to fit within where our revenues are. And again, we have an opportunity here to tackle this on the front end so that we don't have to have the crisis situation or the rainy day. So I got one here and then I'll go to the back. Esme? Well, certainly because not in this biennium, we don't have that. We have a surplus. We have a $2 billion surplus we'll end with. This is the over the horizon. And again, if you use that as one-time spending, the cost drivers I'm talking about, you could put $10 billion in one time in it, and all you're doing is prolonging it, and it will be worse when it comes out of that. So we're certainly will do what we can, but I just think if you see the $1.6 billion cut on the conservative side of this, if Minnesota uses half of our surplus to put into that to try and protect, when the real crisis comes on March 14th, if they shut down the government, or if they choose to cut into other things, I think our analysis of this is this could get far worse. We're not in a crisis right now. We're not in a rainy day. Well, I would have our folks come up. We've been through this exercise before. It was Commissioner Franz at the time where our teams will start and they already are on the periphery looking at this. They will start planning what that looks like on the loss of receipts that we're going to receive and all of that. We had to do this back, I believe, was it 2019 when we had this situation when they did shut down. That planning is started now. It will increase dramatically if it looks like it, and I think it doesn't appear to me like they're moving towards a workable solution. But we will be ready for that, and then we'll put out as soon as we can, as we did last time, what those impacts will be. I'll go to the back, Evan. I'm going clear to the back first. Go ahead. That's interesting. The interesting point. The point is with the uncertainty we have, and we do 2-year budgets, I see some accomplished legislators sitting here that I'm going to use my chance to let them maybe talk about this. They do have the experience in this, but I think your point, Evan, is well taken, meaning we do the biennium budgets and then we come back and we do basically off-year policy and bonding or whatever. In today's modern world with the uncertainty, does that make sense? I will defer to the legislators, but I think it's a question we should ask because I do, and it's one that, it got asked, I'm not going to say it, do you do more forecasts? And obviously we have this question, no, not necessarily, but I think all of you get what we're at here. This happened in November, we come out with a forecast and we said, well, there was an election, there'll be changes, won't February look different? Well, here we are, yes. So I hear you, I think it's worth considering. I think, again, that it begs that question, What happens if you do a budget, the legislator starts working, and the federal government makes more massive changes? I think the answer to that is we cross that bridge when we get there. So,
The president, a couple nights ago, in the address to Congress, seemed to minimize the effect of tariffs on the economy. They were going to have
you do that when you're a billionaire because it doesn't really impact you. So I'm just saying, I'm not surprised by that.
He said hundreds of billions of dollars of manufacturing investment going to come in. Do you buy that? And if not, do you have fear that there's going to be a recession?
Yeah.
And then,
Look, I'm not going to speculate to that point. I think you prepare for that. But let me just say this about what he said. It's not just that I don't agree with that. It's that not a single economist agrees with that anywhere. It's not another country's budget director agrees with that. And the history of economic use of tariffs and trade wars like this, there is no instance of doing any of the things that he said. So I don't know what else to say on this. It isn't political for me, and I would love this. If everything he said, we saw massive growth, massive remanufacturing, massive numbers. We find workers, apparently, that are around that, we all know how hard that is to find. If all of those things worked, that's great. My beef with him is not that I just want to pick a fight. My beef is this is lunacy. And I will make the case on this. Coming from someone who not only could not do budgets, could not do business budgets, and could not keep businesses in place. When you have a casino and you can't make money, that ought to tell you something. At a time when more people are going to get laid off and need to do this? Well, we'll always look for cost reduction, but I'm not interested in cutting benefits to people. I'm not interested in us joining the rest of the 197 countries of the world that have paid family medical leave. I think us in Yemen, maybe. I want to be in that because what we know is states and countries that have paid family medical leave have higher production, they have higher consistency in their work, they have a higher quality of life, and people, for goodness sakes, you should not have to go broke because you got to go get chemo or you got to take your kids because they're sick. So we were willing to work. We had this discussion. Kicking the can down the road, no, we're not going to do that.
Will this new forecast call for major revisions to your budget?
No.
And especially on the Medicaid issue that already got a lot of pushback last time.
Yeah, no, it won't have major, Tom's question, the major revisions. No, it's the inflationary costs on the edge. It's why I'm glad we take and budget for inflation, and now we're seeing what the effects of inflationary change will make. No, it will still be there. I would say this, it reinforces the need, because again, I just said there's just two universals in this. Do you want your taxes cut? Yes. Do you want your services cut? No. You got to figure out how those two things blend together. And in Minnesota, we do a very good job of this. We're in a very solid spot. We're not talking about cutting services. We're talking about curbing growth to be manageable so that we can spend and do the things in other areas like cutting sales taxes, like cutting and improving the R&D tax credit. So no, this should be relatively around the edge. But the question that Evan was asking and others is, by the time you get this out, at the pace we're on, what we saw 3 today, say it takes us 14 days, I'll see 42 different positions from the Trump administrations on tariffs. That warrants having to take another look.
So specifically on the Medicaid issue, you don't expect that to get any deeper?
Well, I think we'll work with them. No, not exponentially. There'll be things around the edge that we will have to look at in terms of this. I think we were looking at 1%. So we'll 1.1%, 1.2%. All right.
How much do you plan to travel around the country and do town hall meetings? You talked about a shadow government the other day.
Yeah, look, my job here is be governor. I'm here, I do this. I got a lot of energy, as I've said. I don't even think the Republicans would criticize if I wasn't as around as much because they probably don't want to see me. I'll go where it needs to go because I think there's an issue here. These policies impact the middle class. These policies are good. We're seeing the opposite of this, which is chaos, tax cuts for the wealthy, layoffs of workers, just all of that. The contrast is so great, we have to figure out how to make the case. And I said, if you won't go sit in front of people and do your town halls, we should open up that space to let people speak because the answers are going to come from folks. They're going to tell you how they feel. And I've been there. I was there members of Congress. I've been here at State Fair, I get an earful. The times when we make that available are really important. So we'll do our job here, but we'll be able to get around.
Rather, state legislative and public leaders say they do want to see you, they want to meet with you, and that you've forgotten their requests for regular meetings and start talking through.
Well, that's not true. So, we have met. We have sat in the rooms. We've met. The legislative leaders are there. Look, we're early in the session. What are you bringing me? You know when I'll meet with Republican leaders? When you produce a budget, when you show me numbers. You're not going to come in and criticize mine where you're like, ours is better, but it's top secret. No, bring it in. There's time. There's work to be done. And you know what work doesn't need to be done today? Figuring out and trying to pass a bill so you can shoot somebody for taking your parking space. Work on the budget. Do your job. Work on your budget. Oh, I don't know what President Trump is going to do. Officer Chauvin has he has 22 years of state time that he will do. All right. Thanks, folks. Thank you, guys.